An abbey built atop a large hill, Castel de Sangro was blessed with natural defenses and an eagle's point of view. Inside, loading their weapons and patiently anticipating the Canadians, was a lethal unit of German paratroopers.
This German parachute company that's defending the hilltop waits until Joe Blanchard's lead platoon of B Company is almost to the doorway of the monastery before they open fire from all across the top of the hill. The other two platoons aren't in a position to help, and Blanchard's platoon is immediately surrounded and cut by fire from every direction.
There was 4 of us in a little pit, sort of, and this guy got us from the bell tower up above. He got my brother, and I got him.
The Dukeshire brothers and their regimental comrades found themselves in their bloodiest battle to date. Wounded, Garth demanded that his little brother save himself.
I went down off the edge of the cliff. I must have fell 30 feet, and I hit, of all things, mud on the slope, and I hit that and slid. Had it been hard, it would have killed me.
As the Germans scoured the battlefield looking for prisoners, Garth and some fellow soldiers hid along the edge of a riverbank.
It's scary, especially when you start seeing your buddies getting all toward hell.
Knowing it would be his final command, a wounded Joel Blanchard orders his men to retreat.
Men go down in by the dozens, quite literally, including Blanchard. But ultimately, by this point, the Germans reveal that they have a tight hold, and 2 platoons just aren't enough. There's not enough firepower, and there's no artillery mission laid on yet. There's no heavy firepower to fight a serious battle against a 1-to-1 enemy force. This is something that's going to require a much more deliberate assault.
The West Nova Scotia Regiment prepared for a second attack, this time with artillery. However, they found Castel de Sangro empty. Garth and the other Canadian survivors were rescued, and the Dukeshire brothers would be reunited. On December 12, 1943, the men were led by Pat Bogart, who had been by their side since landing in Sicily. The occupying Germans knew the terrain, a significant advantage over the Canadians. Moving forward was made difficult by inadequate maps. As a result, they found themselves in a dangerous position that would come to be known as the Gully.
We were fired on by the Germans with machine gun fire, and we realized that we were on the edge of a gully because we couldn't see anything beyond the row of trees.
The days that followed would mean mass casualties for the West Nova Scotia Regiment. Germany had established a determined holding line near the Arielle River. In one battle, the troops impulsively chased after the enemy, who quickly mobilized a counterattack before the Canadians could dig in. Running out of his headquarters, Pat Bogart yelled at his men to pull back. He was shot, and it would mean the end of the war for many of his men.
Colonel Bogart was hit through the calf, and he was evacuated. Major Waterman came up to take over from him.
Born in Canada but raised in the United Kingdom, Ron Waterman was a career military man. He demanded respect from his men. On the night of the 12th, as Waterman was stepping into his new role, his men Gordon Rompke and Harvey Jones had 2 groups out on reconnaissance. By now, Harry and Harvey had become good friends.
He had taken a patrol into the west end of the gully to contact the Germans. This would have been at night. And when he got in there, he discovered there was a troop of tanks, and I think there were 2 houses, or at least one, out where the Germans were holed up. So he went back, and the company commander and he agreed to put the troops on tanks and go in there the next morning.
At first light on the 13th of December, the regiment attacked under the guidance of Captain Burns. Taking out the headquarters and surrounding tanks, the surprise attack cut down many German officers.
Unfortunately, one of the tanks managed to get away one shot, and a fragment of the shell at least went through Harvey's shoulder right about here. And he stayed in the area until his troops could withdraw, and then he was taken out to hospital.
On the evening of the 13th, after Jones's victory, Eisenhower was on patrol when he and his men were ambushed by paratroopers. Harry was taken down by Nazi gunfire. They were eventually reinforced by Burns's troops, but not before sustaining even more casualties. By now, after so many battles, the regiment's numbers were significantly dwindling.
We had only gone about, I would think, 200 to 250 yards. We came to a house, and I was behind the forward section. The section all got down, and so I turned around to take cover under the grapevines. As I dashed in there, I was shot through the hip. I didn't know what to do. I looked down, didn't see any blood. Al Rogers came up, and I said, I think I'm all right. I'll go back to headquarters. I can walk. And I'd only gone about 50 yards when the Germans started the mortar. I jumped in a shell hole and pulled in my feet, but unfortunately one of the pieces of shrapnel hit me between the tendon and the ankle and cut right through my boot. It's rather strange looking back. You realize that all this is happening to you, but for some reason I don't sense any sense of panic. I mean, I didn't think, my God, I'm out here in no man's land and I'm going to die.
Throughout the next few weeks, the West Nova Scotia Regiment would push through the gully and hold their position near the Gustav line.
And it's on New Year's Eve that the telephone lines between the mortar pits of Reg Bullock's mortar platoon and the forward observation posts for his mortar fire control team are cut.
Gerald Bullock's son, Reginald, now 22, had become a trusted leader. He looked out for his men.
Everybody's celebrating. Reg isn't going to ask his signalers to go out and repair the line. Reg goes out to repair the line himself. And you repair the line just like their granddads did in the First World War by picking it up under your hand and following the line to find the break. He finds the break and he repairs it. The line was cut by a German shell, and the next German shell lands among them, injures Reg badly and kills the man with him. And he's brought back to the field hospital, where fortunately a Nova Scotia doctor recognizes him and sends word for his father to come.
Bullock, once the commander of the West Nova Scotia Regiment, had become a member of the War Graves Commission, following behind the front lines to find proper burial sites for fallen soldiers. He quickly came to his son's side. "Good show, Dad," said Reg. "I knew you'd come." Reg seemed to be in good spirits for a while, but on the night of January 3rd, he took a turn for the worse. Struggling to speak, Bullock calmed his son, asking him to rest. They could talk later. Reg agreed and winked at his dad before laying his head on his pillow. He passed away peacefully in his sleep. Reverend Gerald Weatherall Bullock buried his own son and returned to Nova Scotia soon after. His time in Europe had come to an end. As the seasons changed, so did the regiment. Their youth gave way to more hardened soldiers with each new battle. They passed through towns toppled by retreating German forces and made their way along roads churned to a muddy mess by the winter's frost and rain. Their standard summer clothes shed for heavy greatcoats. Warfare changed.
The loss rates are so high that They're reduced to putting cooks and signalers in the front line.
Reinforcements were pulled in to fill gaps, no matter their background. Hugh Cuvelier was one of them.
We had a fellow from the West Nova showing us how to use a piat and a Bren gun and that. That's what I trained we had. A lot of fellows went up in the front line with no training whatsoever, because they were short of people.
This problem is not unusual for the West Novas. The whole of 1st Canadian Division has suffered extensively in what has become its bloodiest battle of the war so far.
I mean, it's kind of bad putting a fellow into battle and not knowing anything, but that's the way they were. Some of them only last maybe a couple hours and they'd be dead.
Under Ron Waterman's command, the regiment started to use trench warfare tactics. They harassed and unsettled the Germans in small groups, as their fathers did in the First World War. A troop of snipers was critical in this effort. Orrin Foster, the man who saved 4 of his comrades in England, became one of the few men in this recon unit. He had a personal mantra: to take prisoners whenever possible. The snipers would find Germans, gather intelligence, and report back. They would then lead teams at night to take their enemies by surprise.
Noisy. That's what we called him. You wouldn't know he was around nowhere. Like, for him being a sniper and the things he done, I don't know how in the hell he lived so long.
The winter was cold and wet. The men were tired. The endless loop of nighttime raids was taking a toll on their bodies and minds. Different sicknesses would sweep the cramped trenches. Victor Dukeshire suffered from diphtheria. Paralyzed, he was pulled from the front and eventually sent home to Canada.
I was feeling crazy, like, not myself. And then all at once, I relaxed and went down, and there's no way I couldn't get up. And I took with the diphtheria, and then I got paralysis afterwards.
Into these trying times came Padre Laurie Wilmot, an Anglican pastor from Manitoba, who joined the Army late in the war. Like Bullock, he felt it was his calling to spiritually support men overseas.
Everybody just adored him, frankly, because he was such a great guy.
Wilmot would become a guide and friend to the West Novas as they suffered far from home.
Officers and men from the forward area phoned me about one young man, a corporal, that had been badly wounded. He said, "I don't have much time here," but he said, "Would you have a prayer?" I had prayer with him. He thanked me. He said, "Now tell the fellows, say goodbye for me. Thank them for what they did for me." He said, "It's all right. You needn't worry."
As the harsh winter came to a close, difficult conflicts lay on the horizon. The West Novas would play key roles in the Hitler line, as well as breaking the Northern Gothic line. But these would not be easy victories.